We are now joined by Syracuse alum and ESPN's Sean McDonough. Thank you so much for joining us, Sean. We really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me. I bet you're having a fun week out there in beautiful Las Vegas.
We're having a good time. Sadly, everyone here is joking around saying that we brought the Syracuse weather with us. It's only mid 40s here and a little bit rainy too, so we apologize for that. But Sean, again, thank you so much for your time. I want to ask you a little bit about college football first. We've seen a lot of NFL players here in Las Vegas and some college stars sprinkled in. We saw Michael Penix and Rome Odunze. You got to call some of the biggest college football games of the season. What was this year like for you?
Oh, I thought it was great. A lot of storylines all season long. For a lot of the year, Georgia was the number one team in the country. They're trying to three-peat. I think most of us kind of felt like, they might have a chance to do it, but they weren't quite as good as the two teams that had won the national championship in the previous 2 years. You had the saga with Michigan the whole year with Jim Harbaugh in and out and the sign stealing nonsense and all of that stuff. Florida State obviously had a great year and got left out at the end. And unfortunately, that became kind of a negative story. But I thought it was a really exciting season of college football. Washington had a terrific team. They just as easily could have won the national championship. I don't think they played their best game in the national championship game. But we did the semifinal with Washington, Texas, which was a terrific football game. I think this was probably, of the 10 years of the college football playoff, the best year of the games, particularly the two semifinal games. A lot of years, the semifinal games haven't been very competitive. So it was a great year of college football.
I want to ask you a little bit about the Jim Harbaugh saga now that he's coming to the Los Angeles Chargers in the NFL. How do you as a broadcaster cover that situation when all the details aren't out yet? He's running one of the best teams in the country. They're playing at a very high level, but some people question as to how they got to that level. So how do you cover that throughout a game and throughout a season?
Well, in some ways, it's good that we didn't have that problem because it's actually more unfortunate than it is good. But this was the first time, I believe, in 40 years that ESPN does not have a relationship with the Big Ten to broadcast the game. So we didn't do any of their games in the regular season. But to your question, it doesn't mean we didn't cover them and didn't have to talk about it. And, I paid attention to it, obviously. I know Jim well. I know his brother John better, and talked to a lot of people close to Jim. I believe that he did not know that this was taking place. I believe that, every school tries to steal the other team's signs. And I think he knew that there were people in the building who were trying to do that. That pretty much happens everywhere. That's why you see the other teams, using the signs and 16 guys signaling plays because teams are trying to do that. They don't have people buy tickets and go to other stadiums and film people. And I really believe that Jim didn't know that was going on. So to me, it wasn't that big a deal. I don't think it had anything to do with them winning the national championship. As I said, I really don't think there was a competitive advantage there because I think most of the other teams were pretty much doing the same thing, or at least trying to. So, as I said, we didn't have to talk about it a lot because we didn't have any Michigan games during the year.
This quarterback class of guys heading into the NFL draft is pretty interesting. You have guys like Caleb Williams and Drake May that have really sat at the top of the boards for a long time. And then guys like Jaden Daniels who have skyrocketed up. You've got kind of the Bo Nix, J.J. McCarthy group that people aren't sure. How do you think this quarterback class unfolds in the NFL draft?
I think it's really good. All those guys that you mentioned, I think are going to be very good NFL players. It's interesting, for as good as USC's been, or at least pretty good, we didn't have a Caleb Williams game here the last couple of years, so I've only seen him play on TV. I've seen Drake May several times. We did 3 or 4 at least North Carolina games over the last couple of years. He has all of the skills that you would look for, the size, the arm strength, the athleticism, the intelligence, the leadership, the intangibles. And having said all that, I heard somebody, I can't remember who it was, talking about him the other day, saying, maybe it was Matt Ryan. I think I saw Matt Ryan in one of those 10,000 interviews. Maybe you guys even interviewed him on radio. He's one of the guys who's walking around. But I heard him say something along the lines of, when you think that he has all that, why isn't the production, consistently better than it is? He kind of dazzles you in waves, and then there are other times you think, you know what, that really wasn't that great. So I think the concerns about Daniels would be his size. I think as the years have gone on, people are less concerned about that, especially when you add the running component, which more and more teams, I think are welcoming that in a quarterback now. So it'll be interesting to see how teams view him. And I know, Bo Nix and Purdy, not Purdy, Bo Nix reminds me a little bit of Purdy. Bo Nix and J.J. McCarthy. Other people don't have as high, but I think they're terrific. I think they're going to be really good NFL players. To me, a couple things that you have to have in the NFL are accuracy and arm strength. Bo Nix just set the record for accuracy in a single season in college football, and it wasn't dink and dunk down the field. A lot of them were deep throws, and I think J.J. McCarthy's good too. To me, Penix, if you ask me after the semifinal, what about Michael Penix? I'm like, it's one of the most amazing performances I ever saw, right? And then you watch the championship game, and he looked like a totally different guy. So I'm not sure what to believe really there.
Sean, you mentioned Brock Purdy. That's one of the biggest storylines people have been talking about leading up to the game, is that he has gone from Mr. Irrelevant to now starting in the Super Bowl. You covered the league for a few years on ESPN radio and doing Monday Night Football, and you've been watching the NFL, I'm assuming, since you were a young kid. Have you seen a story like this before?
Oh, well, it's interesting because I again heard somebody else say this, and I'll borrow it, but here in Boston the other day, listening to sports talk radio, they were making some comparisons to Tom Brady. Not that Brock Purdy's anywhere as good as Tom Brady. Certainly at this point in his career, there's no sense in even comparing their career accomplishments or their skills or anything. But the comparison is that Tom was whatever he was, number 199 in the draft. He wasn't Mr. Irrelevant, but he was getting pretty close to the irrelevant portion of the draft. I think one of the things that Brock Purdy and many other experiences teach us is that, 6th and 7th round picks aren't irrelevant. There are plenty of them who make it and have terrific careers. Undrafted guys make it and have terrific careers. So I'm not sure I've seen anything exactly like it, especially where he stepped into a situation, where they had Trey Lance. I mean, they kind of mortgaged the farm to get Trey Lance. Jimmy Garoppolo was there. I don't know at the point at which they all kind of arrived. But when he was drafted, you would wonder if he was ever going to have an opportunity, because they had a couple of other guys who seemed to be clearly ahead of them. So it's one of the things about sports, and particularly about football, given how physical it is, you never know when somebody's opportunity is going to arrive, and then it's a matter of taking advantage of it, and clearly he has.
What other storylines would you say that you have your eye on leading up to the game on Sunday?
Well, it's interesting, right? It's why you play the whole season. Because to me, I remember not too long ago hearing a lot of narratives about neither one of these teams is playing very well. I've even heard this week from some of your colleagues out there on Radio Row, well, the 49ers made it here, but, they probably should have lost both of their playoff games so far. Earlier in the year, Kansas City didn't have a receiver who could catch a pass. I was at the game against the Ravens in the AFC Championship game, as I mentioned. John Harbaugh is a really good friend, and they caught every pass, some of them in remarkably dramatic fashion, including Valdez-Scantling at the end of the game when he's falling down, basically put the thing away. He's the guy who probably had the most memorable drop pass during the year. So, but I think, it's a lesson for us all that really it's a long season, right? And it's your total body of work that comprises the kind of season you have, not some little ups and downs in the middle. Although I do think both teams along the way had reasons for concern. So I think it's going to be a great game. I think you're here in Boston again, they're starting to say, well, if Mahomes wins, do we start to compare him to Brady? If the Chiefs win, are they starting to put together, a dynasty kind of like what the Patriots did? So I think from where I sit, those are the biggest storylines. I think for San Francisco, you kind of need to win a Super Bowl. Kyle Shanahan in particular, going back to when he was in Atlanta and they were ahead 28-3. He called some of those plays that kind of didn't run out the clock. Yeah, I think it would certainly help his reputation and legacy if they won this.
Sean, I want to talk a little bit about the broadcast of the game. It's on CBS this year, but it's also on Nickelodeon. And you're kind of a good guy to talk to on this and that, not necessarily the Nickelodeon part.
Because
but
I'm a child? Is that?
no.
I guess
Because
we've known each other long enough that you actually know that I am a child. So
That's fair.
Yes.
That's fair. But, Noah Eagle is calling this game in his mid-20s. He's calling the Super Bowl. And you, in the 90s, were, I believe, the youngest person to call the World Series before, I think at 30 years old. And,
Yes,
Noah.
you were not even close to being born.
No, not yet. And,
I'd like to do Nickelodeon because I was serious. I mean, because we know each other. I mean, I have the maturity level of about a 12-year-old, so I don't know what the target audience is for Nickelodeon, but I'm probably there.
Yeah, first let me ask you about the Nickelodeon game itself then. What do you think about, that kind of alternative broadcast?
I did not know it was happening until you just mentioned it. So I could probably make up an answer, but
that's okay.
I think it's a good thing. I know, there have been other broadcasts of major sporting events recently that have been geared to, that I think Noah has even done it before. So
yes.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what it was, but maybe it was the Super Bowl last year. I don't know, but
so this is the first Super Bowl that Nick is doing, and Noah's calling it. He called the playoff game on Nickelodeon last year and some regular season
that's
stuff
what
too.
it was. And I know we've had the Big Greens hockey games and stuff on ESPN. But I think another young up and coming Newhouse star, Drew Carter, did. Who's, by the way, just knocking it dead here in Boston with the Celtics. I was actually the Bean hockey tournament here the other night and met one of Drew's bosses who was raving about what a great job he's doing on the Celtics games in his first year. And not surprising to you and I who know him and appreciate his talent. But I think it's great. And I think it's for Noah, it's going to be part of the beginning of a resume that is likely to be one of the all-time greats, really, when he gets done. I think he has that kind of talent. He worked this past year on football with Todd Blackledge, who was my partner for the previous 5 years at ABC and ESPN before he left to go to NBC. And Todd raves about Noah, both as a person and as a professional. And, he's only going to get better in all likelihood. So I think the future is unlimited for him.
Well, speaking of some of the greats, the other day we got to speak to one of your friends, the voice of the 49ers, Greg Papa. He mentioned your crew back.
Hope we didn't tell any incriminating tales from our days at Day Hall.
Not too many. But if you do have any Greg Papa stories or any old WAER stories that you'd love to tell, I'd love to hear them.
Well, Greg was one of the very first people I met at Syracuse. We lived on the same floor, on the 6th floor in Day Hall, our freshman and sophomore years. And so he literally was one of the first people I met. And, he was kind of, in our era, the biggest star at the student radio station, if you can be a star. But he was a sports director, and then Sports Illustrated wrote an article. This was kind of the beginning, right? Of Syracuse is starting to turn out all these guys. Now we take it for granted, but back then it was still it wasn't in its infancy because we already had Marv Albert and Bob Costas and Dick Stockton, who were all a decade or more ahead of me and Greg. But Greg was you knew back then. I mean, there are a lot of guys and women who have gone through Newhouse. When you see them, you just know, like we just talked about Noah and Drew Carter, and they'd be two of them. And I remember when Jason Benetti asked me to listen to his tape, I was like, he's going to have my job sometime very soon. So, and Greg was one of those guys, you knew he would do very well, and he has done very well. And he's wound up in the right place with the 49ers. He certainly picked the right time to leave the Raiders and go to the 49ers. So I'm happy for him. It's a real treat when you can call a game for your team in the postseason.
Any specific road trip stories that you remember?
You're saying that like you may know one of the answers to this. See, it's part
I don't know.
part of a good interviewer, part of an intrepid journalist. We actually road trip. I don't know if he told you the story. My dad had friends in the NFL, and when the Super Bowl was in Pontiac, Michigan, it was actually the 49ers and the Cincinnati Bengals. Greg and I drove. Greg was a rich kid. He drove up like in a Trans Am the first day campus. I was lucky, if I was able to make it from Boston to Syracuse to attend college, But so Greg had a car, and we actually drove across the 401 across Southern Ontario to go to Pontiac. And my dad got us a job during the game, basically, as like a runner on each sideline. And of course, Greg had the 49ers sideline. They won. And I was not on the right sideline. I said, Dad, I'm your son. Why can't I have a winning team? But we had a great time. And I think slept on the floor in my dad's room. But had a great time. We probably had several other, there were, back in those days, everybody was probably the same thing you guys, although now you have 6 of you who fly to Las Vegas. Back then, we probably had 8 of us who jammed into a Toyota to drive 5 hours down to Madison Square Garden for the Big East tournament. But those were fun days, as I'm sure they are for you right now.
Exactly. We're having a fun time. One fun thing that we've asked everyone that we've interviewed this week, that is from Syracuse, is a really serious question. We got to ask, what was your flip night strategy?
Was my what night strategy?
What was your flip night strategy at Fagan's?
What night?
Flip night at Fagan's.
Oh, flip night. Oh,
yeah.
I
know what I'm talking about. Come on.
I was like, I didn't know what that was. That must not have been there when I was. Oh, yeah. That was, when I was there, I think it actually originated at Bugsy's, which is not there anymore. I don't even know. Am I correct in saying it's not? I think it's still there's something there, but it's something else. It was kind of diagonally across the left, and you came out of the varsity just slightly down the hill and across the street, right by the entrance to the alley.
Right.
But back then, I mean, they did things that legally now I don't think they had 4 for 1. So you'd go down there on a Thursday night with like $2, which is good because that's about all any of us except for Greg Pop had in our pocket. So. And then the key thing was, if the bartender was your friend, like they'd flip the coin. I think what you're talking about is, and if you won the flip, you got like a second pitcher of beer free or something. So
right,
the bartender was our buddy. So we'd say heads, and he'd go tails. You win again. So our winning percentage was pretty high because we had friends in the right places. But those were fun days.
Yeah, well, there you go. Well, we had
way too old to do that anymore. All those,
we had Tirico. We had Tirico.
Bill Raftery probably made me try to do those when I go back there until about, I don't know, a few years ago. But I don't even try to do that anymore.
Still trying to have fun.
Plus,
right?
we talk about, even though you have the maturity of a 12-year-old of watches Nickelodeon or whatever. At a certain point, you probably shouldn't be hanging around on Marshall Street. So I think I'm well past that point now.
That's fair, but you can still get a slice at varsity anytime you want. Still
Absolutely.
standing.
And I still do. Yeah, that's a must do when I come back to campus.
All right, Sean, we appreciate it so much. I'm glad we got to do a little trip down memory lane for your Syracuse memories and chat about the Super Bowl and some college ball as well. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Always good to see you, and enjoy the rest of your time out there.